Oh boy, I'm in a dangerous position given all the talk about food. I'm keeping you from the nice buffet behind. So I take my role very seriously here. So hi, I'm Sriram. I'm a fourth year PhD student in computer science. And well, today I'm here to talk to you about sensors, but we're going to get into that a little bit more in a second. Now, all of you here have a smartphone. If you don't have a smartphone, I'd like to talk to you later. I'm very interested. But I'm going to assume that all of you have one. Now, just a quick show of hands. How many of you know that your smartphone has something called an accelerometer sensor inside it? Oh, wow, that is a big surprise. Okay, sorry, I never knew. Okay, no, genuinely, I didn't expect that. Well, okay, so for those of you who don't know, an accelerometer is basically something that measures, well, acceleration, right? It's a sensor that will tell you if I jerk my phone left and right, up and down, rotate it around, it'll tell you how much acceleration there is. Remember, physics class, change of velocity, right? So, okay, that's one thing. Does anyone know how precise that sensor is by any stretch of the imagination, right? Here's an example for you. If I take a grain of sand and I drop it onto my smartphone, that accelerometer can tell you that something happened. A grain of sand. That's all it takes for a sensor to register something. So if this ultra-precise sensor that can tell you acceleration values down to, like I said, a grain of sand, does anyone know actually what we use the sensor for day to day in your smartphone? Someone make a guess? Well, is to tell whether your phone is in portrait mode or landscape mode. That's what we spend all this money and research on MEMS technology and all these fancy words. So we use it just to tell that. So I find this a bit crazy, and so do many other scientists, right? We see the fact that we are surrounded by sensors that have extremely precise capabilities that are being used for things that are not so precise. So the problem with this is that, well, what can both a good guy and a bad guy do? Right? So I study the two sides of the fact that sensors can do more than we expect, or what we call oversensing. Let me give you an example, back to the accelerometer, right? One really scary piece of work was the idea that, well, to use the microphone in your smartphone, right, an app has to ask you for permission, right? So we download an app, and you say, hey, it needs to record something in your phone, it'll put a pop-up on your screen saying, do you give me permission to use your microphone, right? And sometimes you'll say yes, sometimes you'll say no, because it looks kind of sketchy. But what if you could just not use your microphone at all? What if you could pick up your speech using something that's not a microphone and doesn't require you, any permission? It doesn't have to ask you whether it needs to be used. And that's what some people discovered not too many years ago, that we could use our accelerometer, that little vibration sensor, to figure out what you're saying, right? And that requires no permission, no nothing, and it'll just go on surreptitiously in the background. And that's because your voice is essentially causing vibrations in the air, and that causes acceleration, which your phone can pick up. Really scary, right? So that's the bad side of these sensors, okay? We have these over-spec sensors that have all these issues with security. Now what's the other side of the story? Now, the nice thing is that we found all sorts of ways that we can use accelerometers in ways that were never intended to be used. For example, they can detect, atrial fibrillation, so whether you're having, something close to a heart attack, you could figure out your heart rate, and all these things are, once again, things that these sensors are not intended to do, right? So those are the two sides of this oversensing picture, the bad stuff and the good stuff. So my research specifically focuses on light sensors. So specifically LiDAR, so things that spin lasers around to figure out how far away things are. And in that specific case, I was the bad guy for a while, right? So I used those sensors that are on your robot vacuum cleaners. You might have one at home, and it spins around and figures out where everything in the room is, for example. And what I did was I figured out that this laser in this spinning LiDAR sensor could also record voice, right? It's a laser that points itself at, let's say, your trash can or something, and as you speak, tiny little vibrations vibrate the stuff around you. And that laser can pick up that vibration and transfer it back to sound. This is sort of weird Russian spy technology applied to the 21st century, right? And that was a problem. So that was my first work. And the work after that was basically, well, now we'll be the good guy for a change, right? And what I did was there were lasers in your smartphone as well. There are time-of-flight cameras on certain smartphones. Some of you may have them. And that just tells the smartphone how far away things are when you take a picture, right? That's used for things like augmented reality and stuff like that. So I found out that you could use that to find out where hidden spy cameras are, right? Spy cameras have reflections, and you can use that same technology to find out whether there are little reflections on spy cameras around the room. So again, we have this same sort of dichotomy, right? The good side and the bad side. So all I'm going to leave you with today is the challenge that we haven't been able to solve yet and would really like to solve, which is how do we get the good without the bad, right? How do we make the sensor that's so precise, do all these things we don't expect it to do, but also do some things that attackers, we sort of prevent it from being used by attackers to do things that they want to do. And that's basically what I call the two sides of oversensing. And that's all I have. Happy eating. All right.